All right, moving on to the snare drum preset using the Audio Issues EQ, but feel free to replicate these presets using your own EQs. But obviously I am forced to recommend the Audio Issues EQ because I designed it, I've thought it up, visualized it, and own the company, so obviously I have to recommend it. But here we are with the snare drum, and you can notice here that there's a bigger filter on the snare drum than there was on the kick drum. That might feel obvious to you because if you listen to a snare drum and a kick drum, they sound drastically different. There's way more low end in the kick drum that you want to come through, but there isn't really that much low end in the snare drum, so it doesn't really matter to have any. You can filter out all that low end. There isn't a ton of low end energy there, and especially if this is a live snare drum that has bleed from the kick drum, you're actually reducing the bleed of the kick drum so that there's a clearer tone from the snare drum only in that track. But if you recorded this not with a kick drum or just in general, you might not want any low end rumble, and so you filter up to about 100. I think I have that around 100. That's usually a good sort of cutoff frequency there. And then subtractively, boxiness often an issue for any drum. So there's a starting cut here at 392. Obviously, these are not solid set in stone starting points. They are called starting points for a reason. So if you had a snare drum, you would take this node and you would look for the most boxy sound that you find, and then you'd cut that area, and then you'd maybe tweak the Q a little bit. And then on here at the up around 2.5K, often that feels, you can get a papery, thin sort of snare drum sound. So you might want to reduce that harshness area here around 2.5K. And then on the bottom, I like a thick snare, so I have a big boost. Well, it's not really a big boost, but even just 2 dBs on the lower end on the boost module of the Audio Issues EQ does a lot. They have some analog modeling in there, and it adds some warmth at about 160, really adds a little bit of thickness there. And then power at 500 really hits that hardness, that tone of the snare drum. And then clarity at about 3K, 3.3K actually, and that adds more sort of snap from the beater. Often you can also add some brilliance at 8K, but I have it clarity here. And then I often find that when you increase the air above 10K on a snare drum, there's just something that opens up. So air on a snare drum often does a lot, even though it might not feel like you're boosting much above there, but there's just some openness that happens there. So that's the snare drum start. Use those frequency starting points to sculpt your snare to your liking. And then let's move on to the next one in the drums series, which probably will just go to the toms. All right.